Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad that you're joining me this morning to have a tour of my farm. So my name is Andrea, and I'm a chicken farmer in Niagara area, which is in Ontario, if you're watching from a different province. I'm glad to have the opportunity to share with you about my chickens, what I love about farming, and look forward to having some questions from you guys as well. So this morning, I do chores every morning, and so this morning I'm inviting you to do chores with me. So I put my barn clothes on this morning. So I've got my clean barn shirt on and I'm standing in the front of my barn. So I'll just give you a little 360, okay? So you can see what the entryway to my barn looks like, okay? So here we are. And we would call this the controlled access zone in my barn. So not everyone is allowed to enter the barn, okay? Just certain people that we give access to. So right now, that would be my husband and I, and we have 4 kids, and so they occasionally enter the barn as well, okay? So the first thing we do when we get to the barn in the morning is we check out our control system, which will tell us, what's happening in the barn. So let me give you a view of that, okay? I'll just flip you around here. Okay, so this is our control system, okay? And so everything that's happening in the barn is on this. So this is how we check it out. So here gives me a good overview of what's happening in the barn. I can see the temperature in there. I can see what the humidity is. I can see if there's fans running, if the vents are open, lots of things I can see. How much water has been consumed. And then I have lots of options to go and check out other things. I can see the lighting program that they're on, how much water they should be drinking, and if they're meeting that. I can check bird weights, all kinds of different things. So this is a great tool for us to use. The other great part about this is that I have access to it on my phone. So if I'm out and about, or even if I'm in the house and something's not quite right, this will send me a message and I have the opportunity to log on in my phone and make any changes that I need to make or come out to the barn, which sometimes is the case, right? So a few other things you can check out. There's my lighting controller. Here's our main power switch. So at my house, if the power goes out, we have an automatic generator which starts running. So there's never power that isn't making it to the barn. So they can always have feed, water, everything they need temperature wise as well. Okay, so here's another part of the control panel, just different switches for different things. Heaters, fans, all kinds of different things. Okay, so the next thing that we do is we get ready to enter the barn. Okay, so this is what you would see. So I told you we were in the controlled access zone, so only certain people are allowed there. But now we would call this the restricted area. Okay, so there's a few things that you would have to do to be able to enter this area. So first off, I would ask you, have you been in contact with other birds or wild birds or other poultry lately? Because we don't want to track disease into our barns, okay? So that's what biosecurity is. We want to keep disease out of the barn. We want to keep our birds good and safe. So you see, we even have this barrier here, a bench that you can't walk by. So there's no chance that any dirt or manure on my shoes will get on the other side of that bench and then make it into the barn. So we want to make sure that our birds don't get sick, okay? So like I said, I'm wearing clean barn clothes. They haven't been in contact with other birds or in other barns. So I'm prepared to go to the bench. And the way that we do it at my house, you sit down, you take your shoes off on one side and flip yourself around and slide your feet into your barn boots. Okay? Now there's something else I would ask you to do, and that is wash your hands. So we're going to use some hand sanitizer here before we enter the barn. Okay, so my hands are all good and clean. So now I can touch things and not worry about tracking disease in. Before we go into the barn though, I'm going to show you a few things that I've got here. So on my bulletin board, I have a calendar that kind of tells me as a chicken producer in Ontario, there's certain crops that I can grow chickens in. So that lays that out for me. And then I have this handy dandy broiler care program. So you say broiler care program, what's that? So as a chicken farmer in Ontario, we have a feeding program. So this is from my feed company to lay out how much feed I should be getting, what kind of feed I should be getting, when I should be getting it, and then also some flock statistics. So things like how much birds should weigh on certain days, how much feed they should be eating each day, how much water they should be consuming, and things like barn temperature and lighting program. So it's great to work with other professionals like feed companies to grow chicken well. Then we have a mortality chart. So we have to keep track of what's happening in the barn. If we have birds that are sick or that aren't doing so well, we would track that all on here. And then there's this really important piece of paper. So this is called our flock specific records. So in Ontario, and actually in all of Canada, we have an on-farm food safety program and an animal care program. And so these are all requirements that farmers in all of Canada have to follow in order to grow chicken, okay? So for each crop that goes into my barn, I need to keep track of specific things, right? It has a visitor's logbook, so who has entered my barn, and it keeps track of feed, and if we've put medication in, it keeps track of if I have cleaned the barn, what products I've used to clean, different things like that. So you always have on file what's actually happening each crop in your barn. So like I mentioned, Chicken Farmers of Canada has this program that all Canadian farmers have to follow to ensure that we all have the best animal care and the best food safety standards. So you can be sure that any chicken that you eat in Ontario or in Canada has been grown with great care, okay? So the last thing I'm going to show you is my boot dip here before we enter the barn. So before we enter the barn, sometimes I dip my boots if I'm worried about things being on there that shouldn't be. I usually dip my boots when I leave the barn, so then they're good and clean the next time I enter. Okay, and are we ready? Here we go. Okay, so welcome to the barn. I'll let you have a good scan for a minute. So what you see right now is some really small chicks, hey? Four hours old. So these chicks, they would have hatched yesterday morning, and then they come on a truck to my farm and they get unloaded here. So one of the first things that you would notice when you stepped in the barn is that it's really hot in here. So these baby chicks, they love warm temperatures, right? And just like babies, they can't regulate their own temperature very well, right? They can't put a blanket on if they're cold. They can't take a blanket off, or they can't take their feathers off. So we have to regulate the temperature for them, okay? I'm going to show you, they're all sitting here at my feet. So we make sure that the barn is set to a good temperature for them. So they are nice and warm all the time, and they're moving around constantly. So that temperature that the barn is set at when they first come in is 32, 33 degrees. So that's a hot summer day. And then over the course of the time in the barn, we lower the temperature slowly when they start to get their adult feathers, and actually chickens actually start to generate their own heat. See, they're all coming running for me. So maybe they think I'm their mama. Okay, so the other thing you'll notice, you'll say, Farmer Andrea, why is there this brown strip down the barn? Well, this is an area that we would call the brooding area. So when baby chicks come in, we want to make it very obvious for them where their feed and their water is. We want them to start eating and drinking right away. So you'll also notice that the feed pans, they're a bright red color, and the water nipples, they're yellow. Okay, so it's very obvious to the chick's eye, so they see color. Oh, what's that? I want to check that out. Okay, and then just to ensure that they find feed, we also put this brown paper down and spread feed all over it so they can access it whenever they want. Okay, and so you'll see that's where the lights are bright. So I'll show you across the barn. You see there's nobody really over there, because we want them to stay over here where the feed is, where the water is. There is feed and water over here too, but we want this to be the area that they choose to stay also, because up above our heads here, these are heaters. So it's nice and warm over here. Okay, so they're living their best life right now. They have free access to food and water whenever they want. They can eat as much or as little as they want. They can sleep all day if they choose to. And they're starting to get to know their new surroundings here. Okay, so as I mentioned, you can see the heaters up here. And so they run the span of the barn. Then something else I want to show you. On the far side of the barn, then, you see all these squares. Those are actually fans. Okay, so air quality in a chicken barn is very important. Okay, we want to make sure that we're always giving fresh air, and so that it's well ventilated. So what happens is, if you look up on the wall here, there's a slanted piece here. That is what we call a vent. So when the fans come on, this vent opens a little bit, allowing fresh air to come in, and it gets pulled across the barn and it loops down, and it moves air out the ventilation side, okay, out the fans. So we do that to keep constant flow going. Also in our barn, we have fans called circulating fans. And so these run around the barn. You can see there's one at the end there. They go all around the inside of the barn. Okay, and as they go around the inside of the barn, they move air in a racetrack fashion. So that air is always moving. Okay, now they're not on yet because these birds are still so little. We'll give them a few days to adjust before we add all kinds of extra airflow in. Okay, I'm going to try to make my way down the barn a little bit, but they're flocking. So like I said, these little chicks, they don't have their adult feathers yet. They have what you would call this yellow fuzz, you would call down. Okay, and so in a few weeks, they'll start to lose their down, and they'll start to gain their adult feathers. Okay, and so when chicks come into my barn, that's the first thing I do is I have a look at them. I see how active they are. And then the other thing I do is I check this area right under their beak in the next few days. It's called their crop. Okay, and we want to make sure this crop area gets filled with feed. So we know that the birds are eating well, they're drinking well, and they're adjusting well to their new environment. Okay, so when I come in the barn every day, I'm constantly checking to see, are they drinking? Are they eating? Are the feed pans running? So I should show you that. Let me see. So there's all this feed in these feed lines. And the way that it works is there's some big feed bins that are outside my barn. Okay. and the feed gets brought into the barn by a cross auger. So you'll see up here, there's this white tube that's coming in from outside, and it comes across, and then it has tubes that drop into the feed hoppers. Okay, so in this hopper is feed. So I'll show you what it looks like. So this feed, we would call this pre-starter. So feed is made up of corn, soybean, sometimes wheat, and it has lots of vitamins and minerals. That's just the type of vitamins and minerals and feed that this type of bird needs to grow. Okay, so right now you see it's this fine consistency because that's the way that chicks can eat it well right now. Now, as they get older, they might put more protein in the feed or more vitamins, different vitamins to suit the growing needs of the bird. They'll also change the way the feed is formed, and it will become more pelletized, so a bigger chunk. Okay, so what happens is at the very end of the barn, there's a feed line motor. Okay, and when that very end pan is empty or it's lacking feed, the whole feed line runs, and it brings feed all the way down the barn, and then the feed drops out of the line down into the pan. And then when the hopper gets empty, we have a switch here. And that switch, when there's no feed pushed up against it, the kick plate jumps forward, and it gets sent a message then to start filling the bin with feed. So the feeding in this barn is all automated. So I don't have to come every day and hand feed my birds. So they eat when they want, and when pans are getting empty, it refills itself. Okay, and similarly, the water lines as well, they just continuously fill. Okay, and in between crops, we clean the water lines, we flush them, so that way they consistently stay clean and the birds have a fresh supply of water at all times. So these birds in my barn, they will stay in my barn for about 49 days. Okay, so some farmers in Ontario, they have birds in their barn for 35 days. It depends on who you sell your chickens to. So different processors or different companies that buy our chickens want it for different purposes, right? So if I think about all of you that are watching, if I asked you, what is your favorite type of chicken to eat? I imagine that some of you would say chicken nuggets, right? So the processors that buy chicken to make chicken nuggets might want a bigger bird or a smaller bird. It depends on what they're using it for. So at my house, we grow a bigger bird, so they're in the barn longer. And so after 49 days, then a truck comes and they get loaded into crates, and then they go to the processing plant. So that's how things work on my farm. And so every day I come in the barn in the morning and I walk the entire barn to check it out, make sure everything's working properly. The water is continuously flowing. There's lots of feed. The temperature is right? I simply can tell by looking at these birds that they're happy, right? They're moving around, they're active, and they're not clumping up because they're cold. So things are looking good. We're off to a good start here in this barn. So that's a majority of what I can share with you. The other thing I'll show you, I mentioned to you that, we track everything in the barn. So also in my barn, we have things called temperature probes. So these send readings to the front of the barn to tell our controller, what's the temperature right now? Or what is the CO2 rate in the air? So different things that we track. And then when this probe sends a message to the controller at the front, it might say, hey, it's too cold in here. And so then our heaters would automatically kick on in this area of the barn. And so similarly, in the summertime, when it can get very hot in the barn, those probes would say, ooh, it's getting warm, let's turn another fan on. So all of that stuff happens automatically at my house. So there's some great innovation and automation that has happened in chicken farms. So I think I've shown you a lot about my farm today. And so I guess I'm wondering, do you guys have any questions for me? Ooh, can anyone go into a chicken barn? Well, like I mentioned at the beginning, the only people that enter my barn are my husband and I and our 4 kids. And sometimes if we have an issue in the barn, like we need some machinery fixed, or if a bird is sick and we need the vet to come, then other people can go in the barn, but they're always accompanied by one of us. And they would have to change their boots like we did, wash their hands. And we would ask them, have you been in contact with other chickens? So it's very important for biosecurity that we are aware of who's in the barn at all times. So no, not just anyone can go in the chicken barn. So likely you guys wouldn't be able to come into my barn. There would be too many risks. So it's great that we can do a field trip this way. Do my chickens lay eggs? That's a really good question. So my chickens don't lay eggs. My chickens are for eating. But if they got a little bit older, they could potentially lay eggs. It's that they that's not their primary purpose, right? You got to remember that my chickens came from an egg, and so their parents, the hen obviously laid eggs, and so it's the same breed. So they can, but they don't. Ooh, where do my chicks come from? That's a good one. So my chicks come from a hatchery. So I have a relationship with a hatchery in Ontario. And so I call them and I say, hey, I need this many chicks for this such and such a day. Can you make that work for me? So a hatchery, they get eggs from a broiler hatching egg farmer. So they get eggs that have been fertilized. So there's hens and roosters in the barn. And they bring them to the hatchery, and then they, incubate them. And usually it takes about 21 days for an egg to hatch into these fluffy little yellow chicks. So that's where they come from. So then the hatchery puts them on a truck in these rolling crates, yeah. And they deliver them to my house, and we put them on the paper, and here they are. So they come from a hatchery. Do vets make regular visits to see chicks like on other livestock farms? Well, that's a really good question. And you know what? At my farm, they don't make a regular visit. I call my vet if I have an issue or a concern. But other farmers, they have the vet come and see their birds all the time. So it depends on the farm and the farmer. So I can call my vet at any time, but sometimes I just bring birds to her too if I'm concerned. I grab a couple that I'm worried about and I take them to her, and she can make a diagnosis if there's anything I need to be concerned about in the barn. Do I have any employees? Well, I'm a family farm. And so if we got really, really busy and had many more barns, then I might need an employee. But as it stands now, my husband and I are able to do all the chores. And we have some kids too that get the opportunity to work on the farm as well. So I don't have employees, but there are farms in Ontario that do, absolutely. Can a chicken recognize who I am? Yeah, definitely. So I told you I put my barn clothes on. I wear the same color barn shirt every day. If I wear a different color shirt to the barn, like a red shirt, sometimes I can tell that the birds are a bit more excited, but they definitely can recognize me. They probably know my voice. And as I walk through the barn, I make similar noises, clicking my teeth so they move, or my tongue so they move out of the way. They definitely know who my kids are. They love the kids when they come in the barn. So yes, a chicken can definitely recognize you. Ooh, what's a pecking order? So a pecking order is, when one person, it might be at your house, you have siblings. And so the oldest sibling is kind of at the top of the pecking order. Well, it's similar sometimes in chickens, depending on how old the birds are, things like that. So in my barn, it's actually really interesting. We try to put all male birds in our barn. So we call those cockerels. Okay. So a cockerel would turn into a rooster if it was in the barn long enough. But at my house, they're called cockerels. Okay. So sometimes these male birds, they can be a little bit competitive. So I can see them trying to have a pecking order. When they get much bigger, they try to fluff up their wings and make themselves big and proud. So it's very interesting to watch how chickens interact with each other. Then sometimes I have female birds that also accidentally get into the barn, and those are called pullets. Okay, so those are pullets are before they become a hen. So, and then you can see the difference in the birds in the barn based on their combs, their heads, that, the red thing that's on their head. So hopefully that's helpful. Do chickens have baths? You know what chickens love? They like dirt baths, actually. So especially in the summer when it's good and hot, they like to roll around in the dirt and the straw. So you can see on in my barn, we use straw on the ground. Now other people, they might use shavings, but they like to play in the dirt, that's for sure. So they don't have baths. And the other thing I can tell you, in the summer times, sometimes when it gets really, really hot, we might use a misting system in the barn, which sprays a wee bit of water. So it helps them to get up and get moving and get the hot air moving out of the barn. But no, they don't get bathed with water. Nope. Can humans get avian influenza? It's very unlikely. So avian influenza right now is the bird flu that's going across the country, and that is due to these wild birds that make their flight paths through the country as they migrate north or south. So birds can catch avian influenza, especially if they aren't wild birds like our poultry, our chickens and turkeys and things like that are commercial birds in barns, because their stomachs aren't used to that bacteria. But humans don't often come in contact with it, and so it's unlikely. Did I go to school for farming? That's a good question. So when I was a little girl, I grew up on a dairy farm. So my parents had cows, and I loved being a dairy farmer. And then when I got to about grade 8, my parents decided to go full-time into chicken farming. So I didn't actually go to school, like to university, for farming, but I grew up on the farm. So I learned lots of things farming with my parents. And so there are some great schools out there, some great agriculture programs. If that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to explore that, because being a farmer is awesome. Did I always want to be a farmer? Well, I loved being on the farm when we had dairy cows. And then when we got into chickens, it was so much fun. I always was learning something new, and I love caring for animals. So yes, I love being a farmer. I always did want to be a farmer, and I'm excited that I get to do that now with my family and with my kids. What are some challenges with farming? Well, so we talked a little bit about disease and biosecurity. I would say that is one of the biggest challenges with farming. It's hard when your animals get sick, right? So that's one of the major challenges, I would say, is dealing with disease, making sure that everything is going well with your flock. And you always want the birds to be well cared for, right? So I would say that's the largest challenge. What's my favorite thing about farming? I love that I can farm with my family. And I also love that I'm producing food for other Canadians, other Ontarians. And I know that the way that I produce food is at a very high standard. And so it's high quality food and it's delicious. And I love eating chicken. So that's what I love about farming. Wow, that's the end already. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you guys learned a few new things. And then I'm sure if you have more questions, there's lots of information on Farm and Food Care's website, other tours potentially where you can learn other things. So thanks for joining me. Have a great day.